Hi, I'm Kirsty. I'm going to talk about my experience with OCD. I'm lucky enough to be able to say that OCD wasn't a big factor in my childhood. In fact, while I have struggled with anxiety on and off since I was at university and into now my mid-30s, I actually didn't suspect I might have OCD until about 3 years ago. Prior to the 3 years ago, it had mostly been health obsessions, particularly around the idea that I might have cancer. But I had simply put that down to the fact that I had health anxiety, having lost my mum to cancer when I was 25. But 3 years ago, very suddenly, I started having thoughts about my relationship lock-on, which turned out to be relationship OCD. I didn't really know much about OCD at the time. It hadn't even occurred to me that that might be what it is. But I started trying to look into what the issue might be to try and understand it. And I was obviously so distressed by it. I wanted to find out what I needed to do to just make it go away. So I came across websites that talked about relationship OCD, but as is the nature of OCD, I kept doubting it was that because I'm not a tidy person, I'm not a hand washer, I don't check light switches, and that was what I thought OCD was at the time, as many people do. But it became so all-consuming, constant rumination, constant Googling, constant asking for reassurance from my partner and my friends. I lost my appetite completely. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. I couldn't hold a conversation. I had to be signed off work because my job at the time was very demanding and stressful. I needed to be able to sleep to do the job, which obviously compounds the issue further when you pressurise yourself to sleep. I started receiving treatment at a top mental health hospital, but the diagnosis that I was given was for a combined depression and panic disorders. And I was receiving psychodynamic therapy, so a combination of therapy for the trauma of losing my mum, some bereavement counselling, childhood experience therapy, I can't remember now, and CBT, challenging your thoughts. So the treatment, it helped in a sense that it helped to lift the depression, which actually was just my feeling incredibly low and drained because I was having these thoughts that I would have to split up with my boyfriend, and I desperately didn't want to do that because I, underneath it all, knew that I was in a very good relationship. But I was doing lots of thought challenging and disputing. So this was one of my many notebooks with all of my notes, hours of my CBT homework. You can imagine how that would have gone round in circles, disputing one obsession or one particular thought, and then obviously coming back round and, yeah, but what if this? What if this? What if this? So aspects of that therapy did help, but there were aspects of it that were reassurance and making me question things more, questions that would maybe lead me to go into other themes of OCD, because obviously it makes you analyse yourself more and more. I did return to work after 3 weeks having been signed off. When my medication started to kick in, my appetite had come back, and I was able to sleep a little bit better. I was practicing mindfulness at the time, but my therapist asked me to stop it because I was insisting on meditating at least 3 times a day for 20 minutes at a time, because I felt like that helped me to be able to identify what thoughts were mine and what weren't, so it became compulsive. So I saw my therapist there for I think about 6 months, and it helped me to feel a little bit better, to feel less low, but the obsessions were still there. It had just become that I was high functioning, I suppose you could say. So I ended that therapy after about 6 months, and I was by this point I'd read a lot of books about OCD because that was what I suspected I had. And I was practicing labelling the thoughts, leaving them there, and that did help when I was having particularly bad weeks. Leaving them there, it helped me to not get sucked into it as much sometimes. But I was still very, very much locked on. The anxiety was still high. I was doing all the right things. I was working. I was socialising. I was no longer asking for reassurance. I was no longer Googling. I was not talking about it with my partner. I would maybe just tell him I had a bad day. I wouldn't go into the details. I was exercising. I was trying to eat healthily. I enjoy a glass of wine, so I was having a glass of wine from time to time, not depriving myself. I was not having caffeine still. I came across, I started following a few OCD accounts, one of which was OCD Recovery, Rob's page, and it spoke to me a lot. Particularly, he spoke about relationship OCD. So after contacting Rob and explaining the difficulties that I had, I immediately felt a little bit better because I felt like I was speaking to somebody who actually understood me, Rob being somebody who has OCD himself. I joined the WhatsApp group where we could encourage each other and support each other, and that was a big game changer for me. I no longer felt as much like I was living a double life. That was the point that I had gotten to, because I was still working on my OCD recovery, but other people were seeing a side of me where they thought that I was recovered, I was doing okay, I'd ended my therapy. They didn't know that I was still reading OCD books. I was still reading books like, Brain Lock, and books about overcoming intrusive thoughts at bedtime. When some people might be reading their fiction, their chick lits, I would be reading my OCD literature. But so I joined the WhatsApp group, and that made me feel less lonely. I could really see, even though I hadn't had my diagnosis, I could really see similarities between myself and these guys. But then obviously my OCD could see that meant a lot to me and couldn't help but get in there. So then I would worry that I'm exploiting these people that I'm in the group with, because these people have genuine, they genuinely have OCD, and what if I don't actually have OCD and I'm taking advantage of these people just so I don't feel as lonely. So those doubts then, that was another thing that I had to get over. And as I started to work further on, learn about acceptance and OCD, the thing that became more of a problem for me was my obsession with trying to get better, like obsession with trying to accept, trying too hard, reading all the books, overcomplicating, as again OCD does. But in time, with regular sessions, speaking with Rob on the phone, and joining group chats as well, and supporting my group with their own exposures and doing shame attacking, and really feel like I could be proactive in my recovery, I started to see my obsessions lift, and I could see that I could start progressing with my life while working on my recovery. So around about 6 months after I started work with Rob, I bought a house with my partner, which I'd been wanting to do for a long time but had held off because of my OCD. A year later, I left the job that I'd been unhappy with quite a while, bought a puppy with my partner, which brought a new brand of obsessions. I started struggling a little bit with harm, but it's another challenge to work through. And then recently, so 3 years since the ROCD hit, I actually got engaged, which is a huge deal for me. So I can't say now that I don't notice I have OCD. I definitely do notice it, but it doesn't distress me in the way it used to. With all of the work that I've done on acceptance and the exposures that I've done, the shame attacking and culmination of everything, I would say I have some bad days where it gets more locked on than others. It's a nuisance, to be honest. But I do still see it as something that's ongoing for me, the recovery journey. And I think trying to push it and expecting myself to be better before I was better was one of the things that held me back. But I do hope that hearing my story can offer some hope to people who are struggling at the moment with OCD and particularly ROCD. You can still live your life while working on recovery. You don't have to wait till you're 100% better before you start making moves to move forward in your life. And another thing, you don't have to wait until you have an OCD diagnosis before you go and seek OCD treatment. You've nothing to lose going to seek that treatment. So I know you'll be doubting yourself a lot right now. It is so worth it.